Thank you so much for that introduction, Yanni. Yanni is a really cool dude. I moved to London, I met him, and I was like, that guy is really cool, and I want to know him. And then the pandemic happened, so we only got to sit down and have a real conversation at the speaker dinner a few nights ago. So thank you. This has been a great trip. I'm going to go home now. Finally got to chat with Yanni. I'm kidding. I'm curious, while you're enjoying your lovely coffees and such, how many of you use animation in your work? Oh, that's a good number. How many of you are using an animation library like GreenSock or Framer Motion? Okay, thank you. And how many of you would never do that? You're CSS purists, or you only use the Web Animation API? Oh yeah, we should hang out. Let's get some drinks together. Okay, I've wanted to come to this conference for quite some time. You may have heard me mention the pandemic. I attended remotely, I believe in, I think it was 2021. I was so sad that I missed out on coming to Finland and enjoying sauna. I bought a fake sauna, and I sat on the back porch in London and steamed myself after the conference. I did my best, but it was lacking. I'm Rachel Nabors. You might remember me from React.dev. But before that, I worked on web animation tools and APIs with our good friends at Mozilla, including DevTools Challenger, which walked people through how to use Firefox's animation tooling. That was probably the most fun I've ever had on a project where I got to work with illustrators and create this little game. I wrote a book on UI animation as well. If you're interested in buying that book, the publisher is going out of business, so you might step on it. But before all of that, I used to be an award-winning cartoonist. I made comics for teenage girls, but I always wanted to tell those comics in an interactive way. Unfortunately, Flash had died by the time I got around to web development. I still loved web standards, though. I was a big fan of CSS, and I wanted to make really cool things with CSS. So I teamed up about 10 years ago with Adobe Inspire to create Alice in Videoland, which would show designers that they could still create really cool things with CSS and JavaScript. They would just need to learn a little bit of coding. And it turned out that this was kind of popular. It used CSS animations and JQuery. JQuery for reasons you'll understand shortly. I got so into it, I made character sheets. You can see these from the original talk at that URL. I made everything in HTML and CSS. It was a popular thing to do. 4 years after that, I made a Web Animations API spinoff to go along, once again, with Mozilla Developer Network, with the development of the Web Animations API. How many of you know what the W3C is? Okay, well, the W3C, for those of you who don't know, it's like the CSS and HTML equivalent of TC39. So whenever browsers are coming up with like a new CSS rule or a new component for HTML, it goes through the W3C, and the W3C was working on an API for animating DOM elements. I worked a little bit with them on that, and I made this really cool demo to show people how they could use the Web Animations API to replace JavaScript request animation frame-based animation libraries. It has been a while since I've worked with Alice. When I was working on the React team and with AWS Amplify, I noticed that engineers had like a boilerplate app or a product that they were constantly building, and whenever they'd see a new product, they would try that product with their pet app. And I was like, well, I don't have a pet to-do list or pet photo app or anything like that. What's my pet app? And I realized Alice is my pet app. Alice is the thing that I use to test drive new specs and new libraries. So let's take a look at how this holds up now, 10 years later. I mean, back at the time, CSS animations were not well supported, so I had fallbacks in case CSS wasn't supported. You could still, for instance, see the rabbit standing in one place. So it was this was actually really useful because now I just translate those styles over for prefers reduced motion. When people might not want to see animations, I use that same story that can tell itself without being animated. I also used image replacement techniques to create a story that can be read aloud by screen readers. If you use the print style sheets by hitting Command-P, you'll see a completely written version. This is not the original text, by the way. This is a retelling, just like the book. So there's a lot more context. I wanted to create a new Alice for a new generation, which is why she doesn't look like a pretty blonde, blue-eyed girl in a blue dress. There's always like at least 2 of those components in any Alice, even like a couple of like gothic Alices. Still blue eyes, still blue dress. This Alice is very, very modern Alice. So all the stuff that I used is no longer being maintained, except for jQuery. I used Modernizer for feature detection and dependency loading, and jQuery for DOM manipulation and plugins. I wanted to actually just use vanilla.js, but the things I wanted to show people doing with JavaScript weren't possible in vanilla.js at the time, or they were possible a lot more accessibly to designers using jQuery plugins. So I went with jQuery. I used Hammer.js for touch and gesture support on iOS Safari because Safari didn't support touch events at the time. That's changed in 10 years. jQuery visible to detect when elements are on screen. And let's see, waypoints to execute functions when that element has been scrolled in or out of screen. And of course, scroller for parallax, because parallax was popular back then, moving some things at different rates. And lastly, debounced resize to throttle, because I had to this is the problem when you're using jQuery plugins on interactive things that need to be in view. Every time like a font size changes or the browser is resized, you got to recalculate all of those listeners. Oh, it was pretty brutal. It was pretty heavy. It had a lot of CSS animations and transitions, which were mostly managed by adding and removing classes. I kept this, even though there's an even more fun way of doing that today, using just scroll timelines, because it's simple to think about. If the thing is in view, add the class to trigger the animation. People use state management libraries to handle this today. I still think this is probably one of the more lightweight ways to handle scrolling interactions. So all the stuff I use no longer being maintained. This includes also some of the Sass things that I was using. For CSS, I used Sass for organizing the styles and adding vendor prefixes, which we don't use anymore. Compass. Does anyone remember Compass? Oh, definitely going drinking tonight. I loved Compass. Compass generates sprite sheets so well, and I use sprite sheets heavily for the image replacement. The sprite sheets were a big deal because I do sprite-based animations, and also because they streamline downloading image assets. They made the loading process a lot faster. Instead of a bunch of little images, just be one large, fully optimized sheet. And of course, I made my own animation plugin for handling those sprite animations using the steps timing function. I am not going to refactor the SCSS yet, because it still compiles. I had to go back and install an older version of Compass and Sass, but it still works. And I love the fact that I can just go in and put in all the gems from my lock file, and boom, it's still alive. It still compiles. But I wanted to refactor at least the JavaScript side of things. I wanted to update her to modern standards because last year, when I was at CSS Day in the Netherlands, a couple of new standards dropped, which actually completely remove the need for any of those plugins I mentioned and make it much lighter and more performant. So this is my pet project that I'm working on during the season of layoffs. All right. I actually had a lot of fun. I did this on Twitch. I've learned about Twitch. This is another fun thing I am learning in time off. It's like the closest thing to pair coding and body doubling that you can have when you don't have an office to go to. Have some regular people who would come in and hang out with me. And I learned that actually a lot of people don't know about these new features and were surprised to know that they exist. So I'm going to tell them to you here. So you know the old stack, but what are you going to learn about in the new stack? In the revised edition, we're going to be using prefers reduced motion. Does anyone not know what that is? Okay, that's good. We're going to talk about it. Okay, yeah, oh, Ben, hey, you know, like, even the people you respect sometimes don't have your niche knowledge. That's why we come here to share. We can all learn from each other. Intersection observer, to find out when things are intersecting with the viewport. True story, this particular API was not introduced for interaction designers like myself. It was introduced to reduce the load size of ad bundles. Oh, standards still being influenced by data collection and advertising. CSS5 animations, because in the Netherlands, I just learned that scroll timelines fall into the CSS5 category. And the Web Animations API, of course, because we love you. And this includes scroll and view timelines and view transitions. Okay, all right, sweet. I hope you're excited about all those things, because I know I am. Oh, thank you, thank you. All right, now let's get in there. Wait, yes, this is right. I'm going forward in the right direction. Prefers reduced motion. Some people have vestibular disorders. They might get nauseated when they see things moving at different rates across the screen. And that's why operating systems ship with this ability. Apple is the one that started it as part of their accessibility initiative to allow people to say, I want you to reduce motion in the things that I see. And you can respect this with a media query in CSS that will basically say, does this person have this setting set or not? And you can say, well, if they have it set, do this. If they don't have it set, do that. Here, this is it. I made a little helper function, is reduced, and I can use that to determine whether or not the animations are running or included at all. In this case, I say, you know, if it's reduced, I use the match media query here, pause the animation on Alice's emotions. Okay. And you can also use it just in CSS. This one shows, for instance, if the query has been set, this one makes the bunny going down the hill perfectly invisible by keeping its opacity off. Okay, next up, intersection observer. So the book consists of scenes and pages. And let's see what we got here. Yes, each scene has a queue, which I'm pointing to, and when it's in view, it gets a class of queue. And the queue basically says it's okay to do any animations and assign any event listeners that are necessary at this time, or even to expose an entire group of its children pages. And pages, basically, they get a class of in view when they're in viewed, or viewed when they've been viewed. And this way, animations only run if the page has in view on it. This saves computational costs. Because believe it or not, if you don't tell them to stop, the animations just keep running in the background because you might scroll back to it at any given moment and be upset if it's not still running. The browser doesn't know what you're doing. All right. Love it. Okay, so here's the intersection observer. I was disappointed by the clunkiness of intersection observers API. I'm sorry if anyone worked on that. It should be easier than this, but it can be done. It can be done. I had help on Twitch. I passed in all the scenes, and then I ran a for each on them. And if the scenes are intersecting, you give it and its style opacity is 1. Don't ask. It's a part of how it works. Give it the class of Q, and then unobserve it, because we're not going to call Q on any of these again. So you remove that listener, free up some memory. Sweet. And I did the same thing, well, yes, and this is how I actually ran it across all of the scenes. Whew. Did the same thing with pages, only in this case, I added a little extra shenaniganry to change it between in view and viewed. Nothing particularly spectacular going there. And I made it a smaller threshold too, so it's a little bit more delicate. I really feel like a cinematographer calling out cues left and right. I even have a really nice cut function for giving us fade to black and then fading in a new scene, so you don't necessarily see me revealing it and scrolling it into place behind the scenes. It's pretty cool. Spring easings. Now, do you use springs? Have you ever had to make something bounce and then realized the only way to do it was to chain a bunch of CSS animations together or to install a JavaScript library. Yes, it's very painful. But now you no longer need to worry about that because, well, I mean, this is what it looks like. And in the old days, you really had to install a library like Greensock to start creating springs, things that have multiple bounces or multiple shifts forward and backwards in their timeline. But there is now the very peculiarly named linear easing function. Now, if you know the linear timing property, it just means a constant rate of change in a straight line, which is very useful if you just want to have something have a very mechanical change. But now you can pass it a series of coordinates that you can actually chart across a curve like the one we just saw, and it will approximate the path so well that the human eye cannot detect it. So it's more of a polygonal line easing function. And if that sounds complicated, oh yeah, hang on. This is it when you're passing it to the animations API, and this is it when you're using it in CSS. So it's the same syntax, 2 places. And here's how that looks. I wanted to add a nice bounce. I didn't do that the first time because it was too difficult. Look at that. It gives it a nice little like thump when she lands at the bottom of the hole. There's this handy tool that I used for creating bouncy easings. You can pass it in SVG if you want to design this bounce in a program like Illustrator, or find it in some old tweening library. All right, so back to web animations. This was my shtick for a very long time. It's been 6 years. I'm going to give you a refresher. Now, for me, I often use the Web Animations API whenever I'm doing something interactive, like responding to a user input or information coming on the screen. Because otherwise, I'm probably going to be using JavaScript to listen for that information and add a class, which pokes at the DOM. And like, I'm already using JavaScript to detect that. Why wouldn't I just put the animation, the behavior in the JavaScript? Some people prefer to keep their CSS, et cetera, in this, their animations in their CSS. But for me, if it's in interaction, there are a couple of reasons that are very wise for doing it, including chaining animations, which you're going to see, where one animation's endpoint triggers another animation to begin. That's not possible in CSS, where you just end up making a bunch of delays and putting a bunch of animations one after the other, and you can't interrupt them because it will throw off the delays. Web Animations API takes a few more kicks and can do a few more things for you. So how you think about it is you get this animation object, and it's kind of like a DVD player. I know we're all old enough to remember what those are. I won't make you raise your hands. But the important part is this animation object, it takes a keyframe effect object. You put it in there. It also has a timing object that it takes, but you stick it in there, and you essentially hit play or pause, and you can play it forward to the end, or you can back it up to the beginning. It's pretty clunky. But it works. It does the thing. So this is what that keyframe effect object looks like. It's very similar to CSS. You got to remember this powers CSS under the hood. You pass the DOM element that you want to animate into the new keyframe effect, and then you pass an array of the CSS properties you want to animate to and from. This is a little bit more complicated in the spec, but all you need to know is to and from, and the timing object. This says we want it to run twice. We want each of those iterations to last for a second and a half. And we're going to use the steps timing function. Unlike linear, which would ease us through this change slowly, steps just kind of goes chunk, chunk, chunk. It'll jump us to each of these locations. And that's what gives us that lovely, lovely effect. Now, here's how we stick it into the player. We make a new animation, we pass it the keyframes effect, and we pass it the document timeline. Now, for 6 years, the only timeline available in any browser tab was the document timeline, which starts as soon as that tab is open and runs forever. And every animation starts at a point on that timeline and ends at a point on this timeline. If you can imagine, that makes debugging kind of hell. Also, how many animations can you think of that would like to use a different timeline? Maybe you could attach animations to some other inputs, for instance, the length of the document or the scroll area, and then the playhead could be aligned proportionally to wherever the person was in that viewport. And that is exactly what scrolling timelines do. All right, But anyway, and yes, you hit play with this method. All right, I'm so excited to show you this. This is the sweet stuff. This is the performance enhancement. So the Web Animation API is based on two models, which I think of as the timing model, the animation model, or the when and the what. Whereas we just got to know them, timelines and keyframe objects. We only had one timeline until now, but now we have two new ones. The father, scroll timeline, and its little son, view timeline, which we'll talk about in a minute. But for now, we're going to meet this one. The end-to-end documentation about these features, well, I didn't write it. So I will go explain it a little bit more. What exactly is a scroll progress timeline? I think showing is probably the best way to get here. This is just the scroll timeline. As you can see, the scroll bar on the right is correlated with where Alice's position is as you scroll down the page. She's got a position sticky, another nice thing we have, which I won't go into, stuck on her so that she will only stay within this scrolling area. And this is what that looks like on the DOM. It's just a div with an ID of tunnel and a little Alice div inside it. For people who are really don't believe that divs should exist without containing like information, I made you a printable storybook. Go home. And this is what it looks like. This is the keyframes. There's nothing special going on in here. She's just being translated up and down as you hear, going from being halfway off the screen to halfway on it. Now here's where the magic happens. Instead of, here's where the magic happens. We create a new scroll timeline. And we add it in instead of the document timeline in the animation object. The scroll timeline basically looks at the thing that you're running the animation on and looks for the nearest scrollable parent. That is, it doesn't have overflow hidden or scroll none on it. It looks for that nearest scrollable object. In this case, it's the tunnel. And then you hit play, which means anytime that element comes into scrollable vision, that animation starts running. All right, here's what this looks like in CSS. For folks who are like, yeah, I'm not going to write JavaScript for that. Here you can see I've wrapped everything inside a supports role, so that you can see that it's if animation timeline scroll is supported, then you make this animation. We have her falling at a linear rate. It's handy, it happens. And we pass animation timeline. This is a new property. And we just say scroll. And you can define different scroll animations for different objects on the page as well. So you could be passing different scroll timelines. I'm not going to go into that there because we got a lot of ground to cover. But this is all you need to create a scroll-based animation with CSS. Now, let's talk about view-driven animations. It took me a moment to understand the difference between these two, but I'll get into it in case you're also a little fuzzy. Let's see. There we go. Now, it looks a little like scroll animation, so I turned off the scroll animation for this one. You'll notice that as we're scrolling her sticky position down the page, she's just staying at the top. That's how the CSS is supposed to work. But as we scroll her down the page, her background position is changing to a different part of the sprite. So her animation is timed with how long she's in view. When she's out of view, the animation isn't running. When she's in view, it is. Technically, you could do this with a scroll-driven animation, which is why they're closely related. But the difference is that the view timeline only applies to the object as long as it's literally in view. All right, here's the keyframes. I just told you how they work. But here's how we actually make it with the view timeline. So we make a new tunnel. We make a new view timeline with the handy new view timeline creator. We pass it a subject. This is where it gets a little different. You might say, why a subject? Because it's literally following Alice. As long as that document, that element is in vision, this can run. So it has to know what it's being assigned to. And the inset is a way that I'm offsetting the animation, so it doesn't start running immediately, and we get a little bit of a lead time and drag time, so that the full animation runs a little bit before she's off screen. I had to twiddle around with it a bit. And once again, you pass them both to a new animation, your keyframes in that timeline, and you hit play. Yeah, I do that whenever the page is loaded, or when the element has come into view. So here's what that looks like in CSS. In this case, I am using prefers reduced motion, no preference, to indicate that this change should only happen in that situation when people have said that they don't mind animations running. And make sure that it supports the animation timeline view, not scroll, but view. And here is that beautiful new property animation timeline, and you pass the offsets as an argument. Whew. The difference. Scroll timeline is, well, it's based on scroll length of the element's nearest scrollable parent. That's how long the timeline is. That's how long the animation is spread over. And with view timeline, it's based on the visibility of the subject inside the screen or the viewport. Scroll timeline, the playhead, or the current location of the animation, is 100% tied to your scroll position, where your scroll bar is. There's a horizontal version as well as a vertical version. It can get really fun. Whereas the playhead with the view timeline, or your current timeline, is more to do with the subject's position, not you, but the document element. And lastly, duration for scroll timeline, directly proportional to the scrollable element's dimensions, whereas the duration for view timeline is directly proportional to the subject's trajectory inside the viewport. Whew. So this is why I used the Web Animations API for this, because I did some complicated chaining here. Alice's frightened animation, it plays, when it finishes, we play the emotions animation. This ensures that Alice is kind of like for 2 loops of that animation, just as the tunnels come into view. But then, when they've finished cycling twice, that's when her other emotions come into play. So there's a loop, but then there's a steady progression through her emotions. Additionally, when the animations for her emotions have finished, I call that cut function I told you about. It goes to Wonderland and it plays jiggle on it. It's just a fancy thing that I use to put the cue on something that isn't in view. And then I hit play on the falling animation and play on the frightened animation. They both start at the same time. And this way, they all occur in a certain way, and all their callbacks are chained together as well. This way, I'm ensured that the animations play a certain time. This is how it all looks together. It's a little different from the original. There you go. That goes twice. Now, as we start scrolling, we're going to go through her other emotions. And when we get to the very bottom, that is to say the emotions stop playing, we cut to the next scene, and we play the jiggle. There we go. Nice. But wait, there's more. There is a handy polyfill, because this only works on Chromium. Safari and Firefox aren't into it. The polyfill's actually pretty cool. It just, takes a measurement of the length of the nearest scrollable parent and, devises a timeline, then on scroll it updates it. I basically built the same polyfill for another demo, but this has way better resizing logic, so just use the polyfill and you can't go wrong. I really feel I can wholeheartedly recommend using these 2 timelines. They are ready to go. You can use them today. It's likely they're going to be supported because the idea has been around for 6 years. Now, there's also this handy tool created by Brahmas on the Chrome developer advocacy team that will let you debug them because these scroll-driven animations haven't quite made their way into the developer tools in Chromium yet. So this is really handy. Well, here's the fun part. everything you just saw was reviewed and approved and given lots of feedback in the Netherlands at CSS Day by the people who worked on the specs. So they all got to see this already. But I told them I was saving this for Finland. This part is just special for you all. The Netherlands meetups may have seen it, but this is for you guys. And this is exciting. So in CSS5, we have another spec for view transitions. And in this case, I wanted to show how to do multi-page app view transitions. Now, I should warn you, view transitions, when it first came out as a spec, which was almost 10 years ago, maybe more like 6, it came out. I looked at it and I was like, ugh, no, don't like it. But it has come such a long way. I'm going to show you a very simple use case that you can use today to navigate between pages on a multi-page app. But you can also use it you can use it in JavaScript or CSS, but you can use it in JavaScript as well for single-page app navigation animations. So that's pretty handy. I, of course, already built those with cut and a couple of other things. So I'm just going to show you the CSS base case today. All right. Now, keep in mind, what I'm about to show you only works in Chromium 126+. So Safari and Firefox, they don't have polyfills. I didn't know this at first, and I beat my head against a rock for a little bit. But fortunately, Brahmas bought me a clue, and it turned out I was on 125. So I have an experience with this, but I can say the good news is that means for people who aren't using the latest version of Chrome, they're going to get a fallback to just regular page navigation. They will get the fancy animations for this particular method, but they will be able to still navigate from one page to the other. So yay for progressive enhancement. I wanted to take the second part of Alice's story, the one that I made 4 years later. I guess I didn't say this, but because of my cartooning background, everything you've been seeing, I drew it. I drew it all myself. And I also wanted to share this again precisely because I put so much time and love into this. And I just wanted to be able to bring Alice out. So this was the second demo I made. The first one was trying to show you what could be. But the second one is showing you just how the Web Animations API works. It has an entire talk, but I'm not giving that talk here. But what you need to know is that this one was less ambitious. So I didn't start with this one. I started with the one that was doing all the things, all the scroll timelines and the showing and the hiding and the animations with the sprites. I wanted to try to make that one, my Hello World app, work with modern specs, and it did. It worked really well. But I also wanted to add part 2. I also wanted to bring the second part of the animation story in line with the first. And so I reevaluated the experience. I sketched out how the different demos work together, the long scrolling timeline, and then the very short bursts of Web Animation API. And I decided that it made sense to take the bottom part of the scrolling animation where she lands in the tunnels. It made sense to cut that off and put it on a second page that features her hiding out in the tunnel, drinking and getting up to things kids shouldn't be doing, I guess. Basically getting smaller and bigger in that little mini game. So I reorganized it. All you need to know, I wanted to transition, by the way, at the bottom of that scroll timeline to this new page with these view transitions. So this is how you opt in your CSS, at view transition, navigation auto. That's it. It's going to default to a fade. And this is what it looks like. Come on, Alice. Wake up. It's nothing to write home about, but it does the thing. It faded to the other page. And then here we are. It's another page, and we bounce in. So, like I said, the fallback is still navigable, progressive enhancement, yay. But I wanted to make it look a little cooler than just a fade out. I wanted to make that fade kind of a slide. So here, I created some keyframes. Fade, I made the fade a little different, and I added a little bit of a slide so that it could look like she was sliding out of the way as the other page was sliding in. And you get these lovely new pseudo elements with view transitions. View transition old and view transition new. And you can run animations on them that will run when they exist. It's a little quirky. It's an interesting spec to read, but you can think of old as a snapshot of the thing you're navigating from, snapshot of that page, and new as a snapshot of the thing you're navigating to. And here's what it looks like now. So we go down, and there's a little fade up. I don't know if you could see that. Let's run it again. Wow, come on, there we go. Little fade up. You can see it's small, it's small. But the point is, you can get really granular here. I can heartily recommend this when it has a little bit better support and docs. I will probably switch over to using the JavaScript version and port all of my cut functions over to using it. The great news is you can use it for single-page apps or multi-page apps. You can run it using CSS or JavaScript, depending on whether you're using a declarative style or an interactive style of coding. You can animate the whole page, or you can animate individual pieces. That will require a deeper dive. There are many amazing tutorials about that, which I'll link to shortly. The one thing I was frustrated about is that there are many amazing, ambitious demos out there, but the MDN documentation is a bit spotty because a lot of these things are bleeding edge in Chrome, and some of the demos I found that were on the simpler end, like mine, simply didn't work anymore. So heads up, if you're curious about playing with this, you want to head over to the Chrome's blog post and not MDN, just to get a better idea of which direction the Chrome team that's doing the work on this is thinking. All right, so why use CSS 3, 5, and web animations APIs over your favorite animation library? Well, it's easy to respect user preferences. They're, you can use those media queries, all your heart's desire. Graceful degradation and polyfills. You can still use view transitions even if they aren't polyfilled, and the polyfills are performant. You do get better performance by using the native animation functions in the browser because they tend to be piped directly over to the GPU, the graphics processing unit, whereas JavaScript-based animation libraries tend to rely on the GPU. It's a more expensive, less performant process. So, this also results in a lighter code bundle because you're not loading an additional library. CSS animations in the web are green, not great, but they're green. Just to follow up on what Ben was talking about, because these run so close to the wire, they consume less energy and they look better. So, despite disappearing down the rabbit hole of big tech for the better part of 8 years, I still love telling stories and perfecting user interactions. I was really glad to have the chance to come back and play with Alice, and I got to thank the organizers for this conference for giving me that opportunity. About a year ago, they said, well, what would you want to talk about? And I was like, I had just come back from CSS Day and seeing the specs for scroll timelines, and I was like, I think that's their way of saying be patient. I'm one slide away, okay? Anyway, and I said, I want to do something with these. Just let me come and show the world how to do it. And they did. So anyway, I'm still hanging out. You can find me at nearestneighbors.com. I'm writing a book on surviving your tech career at my Substack. And most importantly, if you want to check out some of the source code, I'm so sorry, you can go check it out on GitHub. It's still in progress. It's far from being finished, but I have some ideas for how I might want to extract it in the future. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share Alice with you. It was really great to work with her again, and it was great to meet all of you.